Hello, could you help me grow this channel? Subscribing is totally free. Just one click below this video is all it takes.
My sister told my parents she didn't want me on the family vacation because I ruined the vibe of the photos. The kicker, we co-own a business. So while they were clinking glasses on a beach in Cabo, I removed her from our accounts, locked everything down, and ghosted my whole family. Now a lawyer's calling me, and he says my name is on something I didn't sign. It started the way a lot of betrayals do these days, through a photo, not a confrontation, not a phone call, not even one of those passive-aggressive family group texts my mother loves to send. Just a perfectly filtered Instagram post of my parents, my sister Emily, and even my cousin Jordan, who lives 2 states away, smiling on a sunlit patio in Cabo San Lucas, drinks in hand, sunglasses on, like they were posing for a travel ad. The caption said, "Family first, always." That line hit me like a punch to the chest. It was the kind of casual cruelty that's harder to recover from than someone screaming in your face. I just stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to convince myself it was an old picture, maybe a throwback. But then I saw the timestamp. It had been taken that morning, and there was no throwback hashtag. Just a string of heart emojis and that sickly sweet line about family. I refreshed the page again, thinking maybe my sister had made a mistake, posted something meant to be private. But then the comments started flooding in, people gushing over how blessed we all were, asking where I got my dress, only I wasn't in the picture. I scrolled through Emily's stories, and that's when I saw it. A video of everyone clinking glasses at dinner, my mom waving at the camera, my dad looking happily buzzed, and Emily in the center as always raising a toast. "To family," she said, grinning, "the ones who matter most." I watched it 3 times, hoping to see some trace of me. Maybe I was just off camera, maybe I had been cropped out. But no, I wasn't there, and I hadn't been invited. I called my mom, not angrily, not even upset, just confused. I wanted to give her a chance to explain, to say it had been some sort of scheduling mix-up or last-minute trip. But she picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the ocean in the background. "Oh," she said, her voice tightening. "Rach, hey, everything okay?" I asked her where they were, even though I already knew, and she hesitated for just a second before saying, "Oh, just a little family getaway." Emily really needed a break, and well, it kind of came together last minute. I asked why I wasn't invited. I asked it quietly, carefully, because I didn't want to come off as accusing. And my mother gave me that tone like she was explaining something to a child who just wouldn't understand. "Sweetie, it wasn't personal. Emily just wanted this to be, low stress, no pressure, just good vibes. She's been through a lot lately, and you know how you two can sometimes." I cut her off. "She didn't want me there, did she?" Another pause, then a sigh. She said she didn't want to have tension, and well, she mentioned something about the photos, about you not wanting to do posed shots and how that sometimes throws off the energy. I don't know why that was the thing that made my stomach twist, but it was. The photos, not even the vacation, not the dinner or the plane tickets or the laughter I wasn't part of. It was that I was edited out before I was ever considered. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I don't fit the aesthetic. I don't play dress up. I don't fake smile for the camera. I'm not part of the brand Emily's been building for the past 5 years. Her perfect life, curated for likes and sponsors, with me left behind in every possible sense. I hung up without saying goodbye. I don't think she even noticed. I sat there for a while, just staring at the blank wall across from my couch, letting the silence thicken. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. I was humiliated, forgotten, like a sweater that didn't match the outfit, left in the back of the closet because it didn't go with the look. And that's when something in me flipped. Not in a screaming, dramatic way. It was quieter than that, more surgical. My family didn't want me in their pictures, fine. But there was one picture they had to keep me in, the business. Emily and I co-founded a home goods brand together 5 years ago. Mostly my idea and all my effort. But we branded it under both our names to make it feel more marketable. She contributed a few designs in the early days, played face of the company at events, but I was the one who ran the back end, hired staff, kept the books, filed taxes. I had all the passwords, all the access. She'd never asked to change that. I opened my laptop. I went straight into our shared account, checked the activity. Nothing had changed. She hadn't even logged in for over 2 weeks. Typical. I went to the admin settings and, without even hesitating, removed her account as co-owner. Not deleted, just downgraded. No permissions, no access, no alerts. She wouldn't even know right away. I also changed the passwords and enabled two-factor authentication, rerouted all system emails to my personal account, and double-checked the payment settings. Then I went into our credit card system and reviewed the recent charges. A few questionable ones: spa appointments, designer sandals, a $900 dinner labeled client meeting in a city we don't do business in. I took notes. I didn't say a word. The final thing I did was open our shared Dropbox folder. We had a folder titled Press and Photos, shots from product launches, interviews, magazine spreads. And there, front and center, were pictures of Emily at her best, twirling in a boho dress, holding our signature candle line, beaming next to a backdrop I'd built myself at 2 a.m. the night before the shoot. I moved the whole folder to a backup drive. Then I deleted it from the shared cloud. No drama, no warning, just like they did to me. I turned off my laptop, poured myself a glass of wine, and stared out the window as the sky turned purple with evening. Somewhere my parents were probably clinking glasses again, laughing at something Emily said. I imagined them passing the phone around, reading comments on the latest photo, thinking everything was perfect. But it wasn't. Because the next time Emily tried to log into the business she used to co-own, she'd find herself looking in from the outside. Just like I had been, watching that vacation video. Just like I always was. They didn't want me in the photo? Fine. I decided right then they wouldn't be in the frame anymore either. There's something strangely addictive about silence when you're the one choosing it. When you're the one holding the phone in your hand, reading the incoming messages stack up without replying, knowing full well that the people on the other end are starting to panic. Not because they miss you, not because they suddenly recognize the weight of what they've done, but because they're realizing you're not playing your usual role anymore. The one where you make things easier by smoothing over the jagged parts of their behavior, by minimizing the hurt, by folding yourself into a smaller version that fits the family mold, just enough to avoid conflict. For the first 2 days after the vacation photos surfaced, I didn't say a word, not to Emily, not to my parents, not to anyone connected to that toxic little nucleus of performative love and selective inclusion they call a family. I simply moved forward step by step, with a quiet precision that surprised even me, not out of malice, not from rage, but from something colder, something sharper, like a realization that I had spent far too many years hoping for scraps of affection when, in fact, I had been building something far more powerful, right under their noses. Autonomy. The business had always been mine in everything but branding. The idea, the logistics, the network of wholesalers, the relationships with manufacturers, the systems that kept everything running behind the scenes, they all came from me. Emily contributed a sense of aesthetics, sure, and she certainly looked the part when a photo shoot or an influencer deal required a face that matched the tone of our so-called authentic lifestyle brand. But that was it. She was a curated personality with a polished veneer and no patience for the work that didn't come with an Instagram filter or a sponsor tag. So after I locked her out of the system and rerouted the digital infrastructure back into my name alone, I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. On the 3rd day, her first email came through. Short, annoyed, and immediately condescending. Hey Rach, looks like something's glitching on my end. Can't get into the platform. Mind checking it out when you have a sec? No greeting, no context, not even a fake apology for, going on a family trip and intentionally excluding the person who helped fund her entire lifestyle. I didn't respond. An hour later, a second message arrived. This one less friendly, implying that she had a pitch meeting in 2 days and really needed access to the analytics dashboard. Still, I didn't reply. I watched her messages escalate in tone, her control slipping with every unanswered attempt. And I'll admit, it was satisfying in a way that no petty revenge fantasy could have delivered, because this wasn't impulsive. It wasn't loud. It was precise. It was measured. It was mine. Cliff, my accountant, and one of the very few people I trusted in our small circle of business contacts, called me on the fourth day, his tone cautious but not surprised. He said Emily had reached out to him, confused and increasingly frustrated, and had demanded an emergency call about technical issues. I told him I didn't consider her a partner anymore, and that, legally speaking, her name might still be on the LLC documents, but her involvement was now purely ornamental, if that. Cliff hesitated, and that hesitation made me pause. "What is it?" I asked, already knowing there was more. He cleared his throat, that way he does when he's trying to phrase something diplomatically. "Look, I've always been on your side here, you know that. But you should know, Emily's been spending company funds for a while now. Some of it we could classify as marketing or development, sure, but not all of it." I sat there staring at the file folders open on my screen, the system I had built and maintained almost single-handedly, and realized I had missed it. Not because I wasn't looking, but because I trusted that the damage she was capable of was emotional, not financial. Cliff sent me a spreadsheet later that evening. I opened it and started scrolling. There were the usual suspects: lunches labeled as networking, Uber receipts from branding shoots, overpriced design software she never used. But then there were stranger things. Charges to a boutique interior decorator in San Diego, payments to a branding consultant I'd never met, and a $4,200 wire transfer labeled only pre-launch support. I asked Cliff if he'd authorized those. He told me Emily had sent the invoices directly and marked them as approved. He thought I knew. That night, I blocked her number. I blocked my mother's too. I didn't write a message, didn't offer a last-word manifesto, didn't even bother with a passive-aggressive quote post like Emily would have done. I just severed the cord. There's a very specific kind of freedom that comes when you stop asking people to care. When you stop trying to earn a seat at a table they only pretend to set for you. I'd been doing it for years, showing up, contributing, quietly swallowing the discomfort while everyone else pretended it didn't exist. The next morning, I woke up to a group text. I wasn't even sure how I was still in the group chat. Maybe it was connected to some old iCloud thread, but there it was, sitting on my lock screen like a dare. It was from my mom. Just 3 words. "Grow up, Rachel." No punctuation, no context, no apology. I stared at that message longer than I should have, longer than it deserved. I thought about replying with every angry thought I had bottled up over the years. About being overlooked. About being made to feel like the difficult one, the one who didn't get it, the one who couldn't just smile for the damn camera and make things easier for everyone. But I didn't. I simply deleted the thread and turned off my phone. The next time I turned it on, 2 days later, there was a voicemail. It wasn't from Emily. It wasn't from my mom or my dad. It was from a law office. The voice on the message was calm, clipped, professional. The kind of voice that doesn't leave room for emotion, just facts. "Hello, this is Mr. Godwin calling on behalf of the Nelson family regarding some recent developments involving your shared business. We'd like to request a meeting at your earliest convenience to clarify some matters concerning account access and liability. Please call us back at..." I deleted the voicemail before he finished the number. Not because I wasn't going to call back, but because I knew that whatever they thought they had on me, whatever Emily had cooked up in that carefully curated mind of hers, it wasn't going to go how they thought. They wanted control. They should have kept me in the picture. Now they were going to learn what it feels like when the person behind the scenes finally steps into the light. Alone, unapologetic, and unafraid. There's a strange clarity that arrives when your name ends up in a legal voicemail, not because you've done something wrong, but because someone else has decided you're easier to manipulate with paperwork than with guilt. I sat in my kitchen that morning, drinking lukewarm coffee, listening to that sterile, flat voice again, because yes, I had undeleted the voicemail out of curiosity, and it struck me just how little it surprised me. The fact that they'd skipped another conversation, another apology, another ounce of humanity, and gone straight to formal channels told me everything I needed to know. They weren't trying to make peace. They were circling the wagons. By the time I called the number back, I already knew I wasn't walking into anything casual. The woman who answered was polite, but impersonal, the kind of tone that always makes you feel like you've stepped into a world where your emotions no longer matter, just your liability. She confirmed an appointment time with Mr. Godwin, their legal representative, and she asked, without asking, whether I'd be bringing my own counsel. I told her no, not yet. I wanted to hear what this was about first. Mr. Godwin's office was exactly what you'd expect from a mid-level firm that deals mostly with family trusts, small business disputes, and the kind of inheritance drama that never quite makes it to court, but always ruins a holiday. The waiting room smelled like dust and lavender, and the receptionist had that look of someone who's perfected the art of ignoring people politely. I sat there wondering how far this had gone, wondering how long my sister had been setting this up behind my back. Because make no mistake, I no longer believed this was about a misunderstanding. I had looked at the account activity, I had seen the quiet wire transfers, and the bloated marketing expenses. This was bigger than being left out of vacation photos. When Mr. Godwin finally called me in, he greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that didn't quite land, somewhere between sympathetic and suspicious. His office was filled with dark wood, overpriced diplomas, and carefully arranged stacks of paperwork that made everything feel urgent. He didn't waste time with small talk. After a few formalities, he opened a folder and began talking about a series of digital documents filed through our business account. Documents I had supposedly signed over the past 6 months. At first, I was confused. Then I was furious. I had not signed anything. Not recently. Not ever without knowing. The documents in question were detailed, buried in legalese. But the gist of it was this. Emily had, apparently with my signature, authorized the creation of a secondary business entity under our brand umbrella, a so-called subsidiary, meant to explore new product lines, influencer collaborations, and some kind of vaguely defined lifestyle platform expansion. It sounded like the kind of buzzword-heavy nonsense Emily loved to pitch to investors she found through yoga retreats and wine-fueled networking brunches. But here's the kicker. I wasn't just listed as a partner. I was listed as the financial guarantor. In plain English, that meant if anything went wrong, if the expansion failed, if vendors weren't paid, if loans defaulted, it would fall on me. My first reaction was denial. I told Mr. Godwin plainly that I had never signed those documents, that I had no knowledge of the subsidiary, and that I hadn't authorized any expansion. He didn't argue. He simply turned the folder toward me and pointed to the digital signature fields, all marked with my name, time-stamped, and verified through a third-party platform. It was my name, all right. It looked like I had signed everything. Only I hadn't. I left that office in a fog of dread, my brain turning over the possibilities like a washing machine set to spin. Who would do this, how they pulled it off, whether it was even legal? But deep down, I knew exactly who was behind it, and I even had a good guess how. Emily had always been the kind of person who believed that appearances were truth, that if she smiled big enough, no one would look too closely at the details. And apparently, that extended to forging digital approvals under my name. I went straight to Cliff. He met me at his small office, tucked between a dog groomer and a vape shop, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I confronted him, not with screaming, but with that quiet fury that fills the room more than shouting ever could. He didn't deny anything. He just looked at me like he'd been waiting for this to fall apart. She said you were on board, he admitted, not meeting my eyes. She forwarded the emails, said you approved everything, just didn't have time to deal with the paperwork, so she'd handle the admin side. I stared at him unblinking. And you believed her? He nodded, shame flickering across his face. Honestly, I didn't think about it. You always trusted her with the PR stuff. I figured this was part of that. He was wrong, of course. I never trusted her with anything important. I simply let her have the spotlight while I ran the engine. But somewhere along the way, that passive dynamic became an invitation, at least in her eyes, to take more than just credit. I made Cliff send me everything, every file, every invoice, every email chain. And as I dug through the mess, a clearer picture emerged. Emily had been building her own empire inside ours, quietly redirecting funds, quietly making deals, and using my credibility to seal the gaps. She wasn't just siphoning money, she was creating a parallel business, one she fully intended to spin off once it reached traction, leaving me with the liability and none of the upside. But what stunned me most wasn't her ambition or her deceit. It was the fact that my parents knew. Buried in one of the forwarded threads was a message from Emily to our mom. Casual, breezy, like this wasn't betrayal but strategy. She's never going to notice, and if she does, we'll spin it. Dad said just keep her out of it until it's locked. She'll thank us later when she sees the money. I sat there reading that line over and over, my hand shaking, not from anger, but from the shock of clarity. They didn't just leave me out of a vacation. They left me out of my own future. This wasn't about photos. This was a full-blown heist, and I had been the mark. But they had forgotten one thing. When you write someone out of the story too early, you risk making them the author of the ending. And I wasn't done writing. Not by a long shot. There's a very specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical work or lack of sleep, but from the emotional whiplash of discovering, piece by painful piece, that the people you built your life around had been constructing an exit plan from yours the entire time. An exhaustion that feels less like collapse and more like a slow suffocation, where the air around you gets thicker with every document you read, every email you forward to yourself, just in case, and every name you see listed where yours should have been consulted, not forged. After I left Cliff's office with the printed trail of emails and financial records under my arm, I didn't go home. I drove to a nearby hotel, a cheap chain that didn't ask questions and had a working coffee machine in the lobby. And I sat in that bland little room with the stiff sheets and overly perfumed air and began to lay everything out on the table like a detective, trying to make sense of a crime scene that had been carefully staged to look like an accident. Only in this case, the victim wasn't dead. It was me, still walking, still functioning, but gutted all the same. I started with the digital signature platform, a well-known tool that we had used years ago for some basic contracts, never anything high stakes. I hadn't even remembered having an active account on it until I saw the name pop up in Mr. Godwin's folder. When I logged in, after resetting the password and passing 3 levels of identity verification, I found records that chilled me. There were not just 1 or 2, but a dozen signed documents bearing my name, all of them dated over the last 6 months, all of them approved without my knowledge. The details varied, vendor agreements, partnership drafts, a loan application, but the through line was unmistakable. My name was the credibility card Emily had been swiping like it had no limit, and now the bills were starting to arrive. What struck me wasn't just the volume, but the way each document was worded with the kind of vagueness that could only have been intentional, like it had been designed to skirt attention while still appearing official. One document in particular caught my eye, not because of its content, but because of the timestamp. It had been signed digitally at a time when I was on a flight to a trade show, a trip I'd documented online. I had proof, photos, tickets, and email confirmation from the airline. I couldn't have signed it, which meant someone else had. I needed more than suspicion. I needed the smoking gun. So I called the digital platform's support team. I told them I suspected unauthorized activity, and after an hour of being transferred and explaining the situation 6 different ways, I got someone in their fraud department to pull up metadata on the signatures. And there it was, IP addresses, device IDs, location pings. All of them pointed to devices not registered to me. Several had come from Emily's home address. One, disturbingly, had come from my parents' IP. It was the kind of proof you don't want to find, because it removes the last sliver of doubt you might cling to. The part of you that wants to believe there's been a mistake, a misunderstanding, a miscommunication. but there was no mistake here. My family had helped her do it. They'd watched her build this Frankenstein version of our business, using my name like a hammer to pound in nails for her new empire. And they hadn't stopped her. They'd helped. That night, I finally confronted Cliff, not with threats, but with cold questions. I asked him if he had known about the signatures, really known. He swore he hadn't. He said Emily always acted like it was just part of her pitch process, that I was too busy to deal with the minutia and had given her the green light. She said you trusted her, he said, looking embarrassed. She always used that phrase. Rachel trusts me with this stuff. And honestly, you were always quiet about the behind-the-scenes decisions. You figured I was ignoring it. I finished for him, my voice hollow. You figured I'd let it go. He nodded, ashamed. It didn't seem malicious, at the time. I looked at him for a long moment, realizing just how deep the rot went. Not just in my family, but in the culture we had all existed in. The culture of politeness over confrontation, of assumptions over communication, of letting people like Emily dominate the narrative because questioning them meant being difficult or controlling or, God forbid, not a team player. But I wasn't going to play anymore. Armed with the IP evidence and the document history, I contacted a lawyer of my own, someone recommended by a friend in corporate law who specialized in intellectual property and fraud within partnerships. Her name was Amanda Graves, and from the first 5 minutes on our call, I knew she was exactly what I needed. Brilliant, methodical, and utterly unimpressed by theatrics. I sent her the files, explained the situation, and she said the words I hadn't let myself hope for. We can prove intent, and we can build a case. Over the next week, we assembled a detailed timeline, cross-referencing document submissions, financial records, and travel logs. Amanda found inconsistencies in Emily's LLC filings. The new subsidiary? It was structured to siphon resources from our main company without triggering alerts, registered in another state to avoid immediate scrutiny, and backed by a silent partner, someone listed only by initials, but Amanda had a suspicion. Diane Nelson, she said flatly, holding up the registration form. Your mother's name is all over the bank account activity tied to this entity. I felt the last thread of loyalty in me snap, not with drama, but with a quiet click, like a switch being thrown. They hadn't just excluded me from a vacation. They had built a financial escape hatch using my name, preparing for a future that didn't include me, but still relied on me to carry the weight. I asked Amanda what would happen if we exposed all of it. She looked at me, calm and steady. They'll deny it at first, then they'll try to settle quietly, but make no mistake, Rachel. If you go through with this, you will burn that bridge for good. I sat back, feeling the gravity of it, not because I didn't want to burn the bridge, but because I was finally starting to understand that it had already been demolished, brick by people who smiled at me while handing Emily the matches. I didn't need their permission anymore. What I needed was leverage. And as fate would have it, Emily had just handed it to me because the last invoice Amanda uncovered wasn't just for services rendered. It was for a product prototype. A product I had developed. A design I had sketched. A concept that had been part of my private research, saved in a folder Emily should never have had access to. She hadn't just stolen my name. She'd stolen my ideas. And that meant the war had just gone public. There's a very particular silence that settles over everything right before you make a choice that's going to alter the trajectory of your life. Not a dramatic screaming over a cliff kind of change, but the slow, deliberate closing of a chapter that no longer deserves your presence. The quiet realization that the people you once begged to see you, to understand you, to include you, have already made it abundantly clear that they never intended to. That kind of silence isn't peaceful. It's surgical. A scalpel slicing clean through years of emotional debris. And when it lands, it doesn't leave you trembling. It leaves you cold, steady, and terrifyingly clear-headed. After Amanda confirmed that Emily had not only filed the LLC for her new venture using my name, but had also presented my original prototype to a potential investor as her own, a prototype I had sketched 6 months earlier in a notebook I kept in my home office, a design that I had never uploaded to our shared files or discussed outside of one casually mentioned phone call with her. A call I now remembered with perfect clarity. I knew the time for private maneuvering was over. She hadn't just betrayed me professionally or financially. She had betrayed me creatively, personally, and completely. She had taken the one thing I had always held back, the one part of myself I hadn't handed over to the family dynamic, and she had sold it as if it had sprung from her own empty imagination. Amanda was careful, as always. She didn't push me one way or the other, but she laid out the options. We could go public with a cease and desist, pursue civil litigation for intellectual property theft and fraud, and expose not only Emily, but also the small circle of investors, including, we now confirmed, my mother, who had knowingly backed this theft. The fallout wouldn't just hit Emily's reputation. It would tank the brand, scorch the trust they had built with influencers, and possibly bankrupt their spin-off venture before it even launched. It would be total. And yet I hesitated, not because I feared consequences for them, but because I knew deep down that revenge in the traditional sense wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want a courtroom. I didn't want headlines. What I wanted was something quieter, something colder. I wanted them to feel irrelevant. I wanted them to realize that I didn't need their recognition, their approval, or even their acknowledgement anymore. Because the truth was, the only reason they ever held power over me was because I kept trying to earn something they were never willing to give. And the second I stopped trying, the entire structure of their influence collapsed, like the facade it had always been. So I made my move, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with surgical precision. I filed a trademark under my name for the prototype's design, submitted full documentation proving origination, and launched it as a new product line under a freshly formed brand, one that had no connection to our old company, no trace of Emily's aesthetic, no shared DNA with the business we had co-founded. I did it all within 2 weeks, quietly, legally, and I made sure it went live 2 days before her launch was set to debut, knowing full well she had nothing left to pivot with and no rights to fight me on it. I didn't announce it to anyone in the family. I didn't send a warning or a cease and desist. I simply acted. When Emily went to finalize her branding materials, her product names, her pitch decks, she would find roadblocks at every turn. She would discover that every asset had been locked, every file archived under a new owner, every concept legally tied to someone she couldn't manipulate anymore. She would feel it in real time, that slip beneath her feet, the unraveling of her illusion of control. The fallout began almost immediately. Amanda forwarded me a panicked email from Emily's legal consultant, threatening, desperate, full of puffed-up language meant to intimidate. We ignored it. Then came the public silence. No launch post, no photos, no announcement. The influencer accounts that had been warming up to promote her new line suddenly went dark. Sponsors backed out. Investors started making calls, and through it all, I remained invisible, untouched, absent. I had erased myself from their story, and they didn't know how to function without me there to frame their narrative. Then, about a week after the dust began to settle, I received another call from Mr. Godwin. Not a voicemail this time, but a live call, one I almost didn't answer. His tone was different, less guarded, more human. He said he had something to deliver. He asked for a mailing address. I gave him a P.O. box I used for business. I didn't want them to know where I lived anymore. I didn't want them to know anything. A few days later, the envelope arrived. It wasn't a legal notice. It wasn't a threat. It was a cream-colored card, heavy, expensive, embossed with pastel lettering. It was a baby announcement. Emily had given birth to a daughter. There was a photo, of course, professionally staged, every angle perfect, every detail curated. And taped inside the card was a small handwritten note in my mother's looping, careful cursive. She still wants you in the photos. It's not too late. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just an invitation masquerading as reconciliation, like the years of erasure and betrayal could be resolved with a few sentimental words. and a picture of a child I would never meet. It was as if they believed the damage they had done wasn't real, that it could be painted over like a cracked wall, made pretty again if the lighting was just right. I sat with that card for a long time. I thought about the girl in the picture, innocent, unaware, yet already pulled into a legacy of performance and curated affection. I felt a twinge of sadness, not because I missed them, but because they still didn't understand. They didn't realize that the worst thing you can do to someone who has loved you despite everything is pretend that nothing ever happened. I didn't reply. I didn't return the card. I didn't acknowledge it at all. Instead, I walked into my new office, the one with my name on the door and my products on the shelves, and I sat down at my desk with a cup of black coffee, unbothered, unburdened, and uninvited. Because sometimes the only way to win is to vanish from the photo so completely that the frame starts to look empty without you, and when they finally realize what they've lost, it's already too late.